that essentially are the drivers of social cognitive theory. This third one involves what the psychologists, and you already, I'm sure, call self-control. I'll spell it out because they're paying me to run this class, but the meaning of self-control is pretty straightforward. Psychologists use the term self-control especially to refer to those cases in which you'd like to do something. Speaking somewhat loosely, there's some impulse to do it. Let's have a third dessert. But there's some long-term reason for not doing it, and therefore the challenge is to not just act on impulses and have the third dessert, but to imagine some long-term good that will come from restraining your impulses now. There are other types of situations that could be called self-control, but the main one the person has in mind, the prototype situation, are those things in which, it'd be much more fun to just watch, TV, but there's an exam coming up, and so you have to overcome some impulses to just take another nap or watch TV or play some crazy game and study instead. The trick, and this is always the trick, anybody can define self-control. That was trivial. You could have come up and done a definition almost like I did without any training. It's just what the word means. The trick here that the psychologist pulls off in all these things is figuring out some way to study self-control experimentally. In adult cases, it's very hard to study self-control and manipulate something because short-term and long-term is like you're studying now so that 3 years from now you graduate and then get into medical school or something, and it takes 10 years to run a study. That doesn't make sense. What happens is that one psychologist in particular, who was up on screen briefly, Walter Mischel, who is at Columbia University in the north end of Manhattan, invents a way of studying self-control. In the fancy language of this, a paradigm for studying self-control, an experimental setup within which there could be 100 different types of experiments. Many of the psychologists who have their biggest impact do so by coming up with a general way of studying something, a paradigm that then other people, including them, can use to study the thing. Mischel's is particularly well known. This, again, is one of the most well-known things in this field. This guy is just, it's known as the marshmallow test. Is that familiar at all? It should be. The guy would hope it is. He just published a book called The Marshmallow Test. It goes like this. He brings children in a nursery school, the same nursery school, coincidentally, as the kids beating up the clown doll, into like some side activity during their nursery school day, in which he tells them they can get one of two rewards. He actually does tell them, well, kids, I, the teacher of today, have to go shuffle papers in the other room for a while. While I'm away, you can get one of two rewards. Commonly, the rewards are marshmallows. Either you can get some tiny little marshmallow, and you can have it any time by ringing a bell, and I'll come back into the room and give you this pathetic little marshmallow. Or, if you wait until I return to the room and don't ring this bell and disturb me while I'm busy filing papers in the other room, then you'll get a big reward. The big reward is just a few marshmallows, but it's better than one little tiny marshmallow. There's a film in a moment, but when did they invent cameras? Every time there's a picture of an experiment in the 60s, it looks like it's some Civil War era photo or something. Well, Matthew Brady managed to take a picture of the child. But anyway, that's one of the children, and it can also be run with pretzels. It doesn't make any difference. Like an incredibly careful experimenter, he ran some of them with marshmallows and some with pretzels. But the experiment is really straightforward. The kid's in the room, there's the bell. The theory part involves what psychologists call attention, which, again, it's no magic definition. To focus in on something or concentrate on it is to pay attention. And so the psychology of attention, which we'll get to again also later in the course, involves essentially what's what you're consciously aware of, what you're focusing on. Obviously, a totally obvious thing to say in a psychology class is that there's tons of things going on that you don't notice, you're not paying attention to, the slight buzz in the room and the person next to you who's checking ESPN scores or stuff, because it's sort of filtered out, so to speak, and only a small amount of stuff grabs your attention. The hypothesis here is that there are some settings in which, if you can't do anything about it, paying attention to it, whatever the thing may be, I understand this is not a very professorial term, but whatever the thing may be, paying attention to it sometimes is frustrating and makes matters worse. If you're on a plane in a storm and want to make matters worse, really concentrate on the creaking noises of the plane. That is to say, the way to not be worried about the plane is to simply distract yourself and not listen to the noises. The reason the dentist goes on with all these boring stories about how he or she was golfing in Hawaii is partly to distract you from the activities of the dentist's office. The dentist does not say things like, hey, how do you like this drill? It sounds great, doesn't it? You can just hear it going right into your tooth. The dentist, unless you have a really bad dentist, talks about something else to distract you from the activity of dentistry. So what happens here in the experiments is that there's different kinds of experiments, experimentally varies whether or not kids can see the rewards during the delay of gratification period. This is the most simple manipulation, it may not be an exaggeration to say this, in the history of psychology. Sometimes, while the kid is in the room, a frying pan lid is put on top of the marshmallows, and the kid can't see them. And sometimes there's no lid, and the kid can see them. That essentially is the experiment. You get, who knows what button I'll actually push. But it looks like this. This is not the original experiment. Michel did not film the original experiment, but because this has become a famous thing, there are essentially recreations good enough